I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. The New York City Department of Education recently announced different admissions procedures to its gifted and talented programs for fall 2021. Rather than using a test, candidates will be identified by families and educators to participate in these programs. This is a welcome change for many, but it brings to the forefront the many questions that surround gifted education. What is giftedness? How is it identified? Why is there so little diversity in these programs? There are many perspectives on gifted education. It is a topic that arouses passions on all sides, and it is sure to be an issue for the next mayor. Today, EdCast begins its look at gifted education by speaking with advocates for gifted students about these programs and some of the controversies surrounding them. Coming up now on EdCast. Joining me today are two guests with expertise in the area of gifted education. Jonathan Plucker is the Julian Stanley Professor of Talent Development at Johns Hopkins University and the president of the National Association of Gifted Children. April Wells is the gifted coordinator in Illinois School District U46. Her book, Achieving Equity in Gifted Programming, Dismantling Barriers and Tapping Potential, was published in January 2020. Thank you both for taking the time to be with us today on EdCast.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, you're welcome. I want to start by laying the foundation for conversations about gifted education. And we know it's in the news. So I want to begin by asking, what is giftedness and how is it defined? April, what would you say to that?
Yes, so I think it's befitting to start with our definition as we look through the lens of the National Association for Gifted Children. And we certainly understand that states and school districts and schools have definitions that also resemble the same to provide a cohesive understanding. So giftedness, as we see, is truly defined as those students who have gifts and talents and perform or show the capacity or capability to perform at higher levels, particularly when they're compared to peers. And the comparison group for those peers would be individuals who come from similar backgrounds, have same previous opportunities for learning, same age and experience. What's really interesting as we note the definition of gifted education is these are students who require modifications to their educational experience in order for them to be able to learn and to realize the potential. That's something that is imperative that we see and understand. We do point out that giftedness occurs in all populations. We recognize that we identify students from all racial, ethnic, and cultural populations. That also includes language backgrounds, as well as socioeconomic backgrounds. We like to really stress that gifted education is an opportunity when we look at the definition of students to provide them an optimal learning environment that is matched to honor the trajectory of their talents and skills and abilities.
Okay, so let me move from there then. That's a very comprehensive definition, and I appreciate that. So in terms of identifying gifted children, Jonathan, what would you say is the right age to start that? There's controversy about that. Maybe New York City, for example, is starting that too soon. I think they begin at age 4, testing children. So what would you say is the age to start, and what would you say are the appropriate measures that we should be using?
This is going to be a theme for me throughout this conversation, but it's complicated. And I don't know many people who focus on meeting the needs of advanced students who think that identifying as young as 4 years old is a great idea. Specifically, just because of all the various equity problems that it causes, which I know we are going to talk about today. It just becomes a proxy for who had access to, for example, high quality preschool. So I don't know many people within the field who think starting as young as New York City has traditionally, at least for this past generation. I don't know many people who think that that's a great idea. And as far as how do you identify sort of advanced skills, talent, giftedness. Again, it really depends on what sorts of services you plan to offer. So if you have, if you've decided within your schools that you really want to offer, say, advanced math, well, the way that you identify for advanced math is going to be very, very different than if you have an advanced writing program or a program that, for example, really focuses on creativity and engineering. One of the problems that we see schools make is that they essentially collect all these data on these kids, and you get all this information to figure out who, you know, is sort of globally talented, when your programming doesn't actually address that. So there has to be this identification services match. We think that is very, very important. Once you figure that out, it becomes a lot easier to figure out, are there certain standardized tests that would give you useful information? Are there certain teacher parent rating scales that could give you useful information? Would self and peer nominations give you helpful information? Are there creativity tasks that you could use? There's all these different ways to do it, but it's really the question that we think school districts struggle with, because they often don't ask it, is, what are we identifying talented students for? That is the most important foundational question. And quite frankly, I'm not sure New York City has ever asked and answered that question for itself, which is one reason why it's kind of all over the map and it really hasn't worked for lots of kids.
So there could be a mismatch, as it often is in testing, let me add, between what we're testing and what we really want to see and find. The testing doesn't often match what we are looking for. Now, I want to ask April then, in your school district, what are you using to identify gifted students?
Before I talk about what we're using, I do like to address that our program and programming options are ones that at the elementary, we serve for students in math and reading. So then to look through the lens of identifying and what services are we identifying for, we're pretty open that we do use a cognitive ability measure and an achievement measure. We provide those opportunities in order to coalesce ideas around a more comprehensive profile. And we know that no single instrument or instruments will tell the story. We have a qualitative measure we use as an observation checklist to provide additional insight. I would certainly like to say that we also look through the lens of giftedness as it relates to the context in our environment. So that's something that's really clearly understood in our world of gifted education. When we see it, it certainly relates to the context or the environment for services you're providing.
So Jonathan touched on this briefly, and that is in New York City right now, because of the pandemic, they will not be using the standardized tests that they usually use to identify gifted students, a test that's very controversial, as I mentioned. So they are going to be relying on recommendations from families and from teachers, and I think interviews. So what do you think of that? Is that a better measure than a standardized test? Or getting back to what Jonathan said, it's not an easy answer.
It's true. It's because it is complex. When we think of all of those elements have certain pros and cons that would support a gifted identification protocol. It's how we implement this. What are the additional supports? Particularly, are we looking through a culturally aware, culturally respectful lens as we do these interviews? And so those pieces add to the complexity of it. And I would say, like Jonathan, it is complex. And it certainly involves a very detailed review for the implementation.
April raises a very important point, which is that essentially all of the measures that you just mentioned, I mean, they are they're essentially strategies to try to get insight into who needs to be challenged more, right? That's what this is all about, is identifying the students whose academic needs are not currently being served. That's really what advanced education, gifted education is all about. Well, like every measure that you just mentioned, interviews, recommendations, those are by definition very subjective. And I totally see why they're not going to use the test this year. I've been outspoken, not a huge fan of how it's been used in the past, especially starting at 4. But the alternative, if not done very, very carefully, could be even more inequitable than what they used to use. And so whenever someone says, well, we're going to try this instead, what do you think? I always kind of clutch up and go, it depends on how you're using it. Like, talk to me about how these interviews are going to happen. Talk to me about how you're going to try to prevent some of that subjectivity.
I will say that there are many people in the city who certainly don't even think there is a need for gifted programs. Jonathan has said, well, you know, it's meeting the needs of students whose needs couldn't be met in any other way. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? Why do we need gifted programs to begin with? Why can't we just put all the children together and have kind of enrichment programs for all? I know you both have heard of that as the alternative to gifted programs. So why do we even need gifted programs? I think that's a key thing we need to talk about today.
Absolutely. And one reason we have to talk about it, you just gave us a great example of it. Enrichment programs are gifted education programs. They were among the first gifted education programs. The debate within New York City and several other school districts across the country has really kind of said it's, you know, gifted or enrichment. You know, that's like saying you can take a painkiller or Tylenol. No, they actually overlap. They are. It's we need them because we have plenty of studies that show that advanced students' needs generally are not met within the regular classroom. And I don't think that's all that controversial. The question is, do you have to have special services to meet those needs? I suspect April and I are both on the yes, you do end of that. The alternative is, well, we're just going to have teachers sort of learn to differentiate for different students' needs within the regular classroom. Here's why that logic has never made never made sense to me, Linda, is like your average elementary school classroom has anywhere from like 7 or 8 grade levels of student performance in it to 10 to 11. Even in sort of high poverty schools, there's a tremendous range of student performance. That is incredibly difficult for even the best teachers in the world to be able to actually meet all of those students' needs. That's why we have special education too, right? It's because there are certain student needs that are very difficult to meet without extra support. And many of those special education students are also very, very talented, right? So again, it becomes complex. It's just too complicated for most people to do in the regular classroom.
Now, there is a trend in special education of bringing together the special education children with the children who are not special ed. And that is a movement as well, to not separate them. But I want to get to this notion of how we provide gifted services and what they should look like. April, in your district, do you have separate classes for gifted students, or are they just pulled out for some additional services? Tell us about what that looks like in Chicago. I'm sorry, in your district.
Great, yes, we are. We're right outside of Chicago.
Outside of Chicago, I knew that.
Our programming consists of an opportunity that has really been a game changer for us, and it has allowed us to shift from this approach of identifying and then serving. So we have talent development. We have front loading, where we provide opportunities where we expose our scholars to the experiences and support them prior to gifted identification. That's targeted at our Title I schools. So in the environments where we have the higher incidences of poverty, those students receive direct instruction from a gifted specialist. That's at grades 2 and 3. Following that, we have, and that's a potential pathway into our self-contained, meaning classroom is actually all instruction facilitated by the teacher of gifted ed. That's our 4th through 6th programming, where students are with their peers who have been identified through our gifted services. Those students are with their gifted identified peers for all of their core areas of instruction, and they continue in our programming through middle school. So we have the option, we have programming that consists of our talent scouting, and those students are not technically labeled gifted. We believe that it's more about providing the opportunity and experience before the label. And then that's a potential pathway for district programming for our gifted services at the elementary.
I'm going to get to some of the studies now that look at giftedness and gifted education from many different sides. So I mean, both of you are well aware of what some of the criticisms have been about gifted education. I suppose that one of the most damaging is that children really don't benefit from being in gifted programs, and that we have solid evidence that demonstrates that students really do need to be in gifted programs if they are to excel and reach their full potential.
I mean, I want to start by saying that we almost certainly agree with many of the criticisms of the programming, and I think that's a misconception that's widely shared, is that everyone within gifted education wants these programs to stay exactly the way they are. I would say that that at that sort of field level, people have been advocating for sort of radical change for a long time. One of the reasons why I love what April and her colleagues have done is that they have actually gone out and changed it and really overhauled this sort of traditional model. There have been studies recently that have said, look, these programs don't work. There was just one a week ago. Here's the problem with it, though, is, again, since there aren't common programming definitions, all sorts of meeting kids' needs get lumped together. Mm-hmm. So earlier, Linda, you mentioned, well, you know, some people say we should just meet the needs of advanced students within the regular classroom. Well, okay, but you can't have pull-out programs and special schools and acceleration and enrichment and regular classroom instruction all lumped together, which is what a lot of these studies do. So if you did that, we would predict the study would find very little benefit because it's not looking at the different program types. So for example, we know that single subject acceleration. So you've got a third grader who comes to the first day of school and is working at the 6th grade level within math, but maybe not in other areas. So you find ways to get them a more advanced experience just within math. Maybe they don't have to leave their classroom, or maybe they go to 6th grade math every single day. That's being compared, and you know, again, we have decades of data saying that that works exceptionally well. But you're comparing that in most of these studies with the student whose teacher says, oh, you know what, I'll just find a way to differentiate for them. Is it really happening? Studies tell us probably not, but you're averaging all those together, so the effects become very, very small.
So did the recent study that said there was not much gain in reading, and also they pointed out that minority children gained the least. And I want to talk about that for 1 minute. I mean, gifted programs certainly are criticized for their lack of diversity. But I also want to ask you, before we even get to that, you both mentioned about how a lack of gifted education can really be harmful to a gifted student. But what happens to minority children, or children who are not gifted, not just minority, children who are not gifted in the classroom in which most of the gifted students have been pulled out into a separate class? Is that detrimental to them? April, what would you say to that? I mean, if we pull out the kids.
Just in terms of orienting ourselves around understanding, one thing as someone who is supportive of the work of anti-bias and anti-racism education, I'd like to really push us to the edge in terms of thinking about groups of students. So when we think through the lens of, instead of minority students, students who are culturally, linguistically, or economically diverse, understanding that, because that allows us to see them through a lens of more of a strengths-based lens. And honestly, I will actually pitch this part of the conversation back to Jonathan, but I did want us to, just in terms of orienting ourselves around how we see giftedness, that's part of the work that we do when we look through the lens of equity and access. So understanding what those experiences means for students who are from groups that are minoritized or marginalized, I think is something. Jonathan, would you be able to jump in on that?
I don't know anyone who focuses on gifted or advanced education who doesn't feel very strongly that these can't be programs or services just for, upper middle class, upper class students. There has to be much more diversity. We know that talent is not the special purview of certain demographic groups. There's talent everywhere. We have plenty of studies that specifically show that. Like even studies, we've got literally 30 years of studies on this now, that if you specifically train teachers to look for talent in student populations where they normally don't see it, in very short order, they start to see all the talent that's there. And so it's just it is bias, discrimination, stereotyping. This is the big change that I think we need to make in these programs. And I would say New York City's current programs can be very justifiably and harshly criticized for the fact that, a generation ago, they made all these program changes, and several people at the time in the field said, if you do this, you're going to end up with a very upper income, white, Asian American student population, and you're going to drive a lot of diversity straight out of this system. And they did it anyway, and that's exactly what's happened. And then they're like, look, gifted doesn't work. And it's like, no, your rather poorly chosen strategies for it, identification, services, etc., that's what didn't work here, and that's what's caused New York City's problems.
Now, we only have a little bit of time, so I really want to give you both a chance to talk about what you envision as what should happen in terms of gifted education. What would you like to see? April, let me start with you. What would you like to see happening? What do you recommend New York City do based on your own experiences?
So when I think of gifted, I think of it as an essential piece that's absolutely critical to students from all backgrounds being able to maximize their experiences. That being said, I'd like to see us remove barriers that preclude access, so students who desperately need these opportunities are provided services in a way that is a systemic approach to delivering instruction and psychosocial support to meet their needs. I would like us to begin to revisit the way we see the needs of learners who are advanced and what they deserve, quite frankly, as an attestment to us believing that every student deserves an opportunity where they have a school environment and opportunity that pushes them to the edge of their growth to be able to maximize potential. And those are some of the experiences I think that, we've continued our advocacy and will continue through the lens of our work in gifted education.
And what would you use as a tool for finding that out?
So I think one thing is really when we look at changing practices. So instead of identifying students and then supporting them in those areas, I believe more support is necessary when we look at leveling playing fields and providing opportunities. As we've touched on very briefly, sometimes the cultural perception disconnect, some of the things that perpetuate missingness and invisibility and giftedness. So looking at the way as a school system, we shift the focus so that it's about supporting learners and then identifying and providing commensurate services as a result of that. I also will say that the instruments certainly need to be tied to programming and the opportunities that will be implemented. Another piece is ensuring that we're making adequate comparisons when we're looking at groups of students to make those identification and placement decisions.
Jonathan, we have a little bit of time, just a little. What would you like to add to that in terms of what you would like to see us do in the future moving forward?
April's vision is fantastic. I mean, if I could bottle that up and give it to every single school in this country, it would literally transform our culture, economy, et cetera. Specifically within New York City, I would not worry about advanced services that much the first few years of school. I would really focus on what April talked about before, front loading, providing rigorous opportunities to every single student who seems like they want them in every single school. This is something that really trips people up. If you don't expand services, you're never going to get equity within advanced education. So making sure every single school in New York City has advanced services and that each principal is held accountable for making sure that students are receiving those services, just like we do for special education. Beyond that, people are always surprised whenever I say this, Linda. I'm totally agnostic on how we do that. It's going to look very different in PS 189X in the North Bronx than it is in a school in Flushing, on Staten Island, on the Upper West Side, on the Lower East Side, right? So if schools can find ways to do it, where it's within the same classroom and they're maybe using within class ability grouping, which has tons of support. Awesome. If they decide we kind of need to do a pull-out program, as long as you're being equitable, I'm totally fine with that. Again, it's as long as you can show that you're providing advanced services to students who need them to be challenged. I actually don't care that much about what those services look like.
That's all the time we have. I really want to thank you both so much for joining me on what I know is an important conversation that we will be revisiting again. So I hope I can go back to both of you for some more information. So thank you so much for joining us today. April Wells, Jonathan Plucker, was a very important conversation. Don't go away. We'll be right back with our Ed Bites. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites. On a recent EdCast, we examined the impact of COVID-19 on the mental health of children and adolescents, pointing to the detrimental effects of children being pulled out of school and deprived of their usual activities and contacts. Mental health professionals now say that the pandemic's effect on children will continue for years to come. A follow-up to our EdCast on the digital divide finds that computer access and broadband connectivity is still an issue for students across the country. In a USA Today survey, at least 11 of the country's largest school districts were still working to provide access to technology or the internet for students. District administration reports that teacher stress, not low pay, is the main reason many have quit the profession, even pre-pandemic. A RAND Corporation survey of nearly 1,000 former public school educators says the pandemic has made matters worse, with teachers experiencing more stress and more exiting the classroom. With many teachers departing the classroom, it seems that principals are not far behind. Education Week reports that 42% of principals indicated they were considering leaving their jobs. Common reasons given include working conditions, compensation, and the lack of decision-making authority. That's it for this edition of EdCast. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.